Welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we've discontinued our online or our in-person revenue generating programs and now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to continue to pay our Mexican staff. You can donate at our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. Today's program is a special one. We're honored to have with us three immigration attorneys who've been working with immigrants and who will be giving a report on the situation both at Mexico's northern border and the southern border, where there's a lot to report, in fact. We will do this sort of as an informal discussion among our experts and moderated by Corinne Shannon, who is an attorney, writer, and former law professor who's focused on U.S. immigration law and policy for nearly 30 years. She's the co-author of several books and the author of hundreds of articles about immigration law and global migration. She's made numerous trips to the U.S.-Mexico border to provide pro bono legal services to immigrant families held by the U.S. government in detention camps in New Mexico and Texas. She's also on the board of directors of Safe Passage Project, a New York-based nonprofit that provides free lawyers to immigrant youth. Let me turn the floor over to you, Corinne, and you can introduce your colleagues.
Thank you very much, Cliff, and thank you, everybody. Hello, buenas tardes, and welcome to our event. I'm going to share my screen just for a moment. I hope you can see that to show you who we have with us today. Rebecca Eichler is a San Miguel resident, a U.S. immigration attorney for more than 20 years, I believe. She is very active in migrant issues since having moved to Mexico. So she was going to leave that behind when she moved. That didn't work. Rebecca works with Caminamos Juntos, which, as many of you know, provides assistance to Mexicans who have been deported from the United States, helps them resettle in Mexico and in the San Miguel area in particular. She's also on the board of the Latin American Relief Fund, which provides financial support to the Abba House shelter in Celaya, where Rebecca is a frequent volunteer. And Rebecca is one of the featured attorneys in an upcoming documentary film called Las Abogadas, Women on the Front Lines of the Migrant Crisis at the Border. We were going to be joined by the director of that film, Vicki Bruce, but she had a last-minute conflict. So we're very pleased to welcome another one of the attorneys who is featured in the documentary I just mentioned, Meritxell Calderon Vargas. She's a human rights attorney based in Tijuana. So she is really there on the front line of the border issues. Her human rights work ranges well beyond migration issues, and she'll talk to you a little bit about that as well. But today's topic is focused on what is happening on both of Mexico's borders, the northern border and the southern border. Rebecca and Meritxell have been in both places and can talk to you about what they have seen. So I'm going to stop. Was I sharing my screen, or did you not even see that slide? Looks like you never even saw it. No matter. Rebecca and Meritxell, welcome. So Rebecca, can I just confirm that you're I'm not sharing my screen now.
You're not sharing your screen. All
Okay.
that work for nothing.
Well, okay, let's see where we are. Let me just show you my pretty slide because I was so proud of it and now I can't even show it to you. There we go. So there we are, Rebecca and Marichelle. Okay. So Rebecca, I'll start with you since you are the local resident and the connection with this wonderful organization, Center for Global Justice. Let's start with a brief summary of your experience providing legal advice to the caravan. When the caravan came through central Mexico a couple of years ago, you were the only attorney within thousands of miles who knew anything about US immigration law and what was in store for them when they got to the border. Can you talk a little bit about what you experienced there?
Sure. That was a lifetime ago. But as you said, there was, reports of thousands and thousands of people coming up. And I think the first caravan had about 5,000 people in it. And at that same time, former President Trump was doing everything he could to block them once they came to the US. He was sending the National Guard to the border, and his Attorney General at the same time was upending decades of precedents, of legal precedents, and declaring, different things no longer grounds for asylum, such as gang violence and domestic violence. So the whole legal landscape was really was in flux at that time. The caravan, thousands of people were coming this way, and I realized, coming from the DC area where there's every other person you meet is a lawyer. I was surprised that there really weren't that many lawyers or any lawyers here. There were groups of people going to Mexico City to provide legal assistance, but here in San Miguel, and we knew with certainty that they would be coming through here because Celaya, the town about 40 minutes away, is at the crossroads of the train tracks, which is a common route of transportation for people. So we knew that they were going to come up here, and I managed on the first caravan, recruited 3 other U.S. immigration lawyers to come and help me. And I have a 1985 Volkswagen Vanagon that I used for road trips, and it turned into a perfect mobile legal aid office. The 4 of us drove it to the stadium in Querétaro, and it was really bizarre because, like, hi, I'm Rebecca. Do you want the top bunk or the bottom bunk? And 4 strangers spent the night on the grounds of the sports stadium. We spent all day providing what information that we could to people, and all day long we spent the night. And then the next morning they woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to continue on. We drove to the next spot in Irapuato and followed them there, and again set up a legal aid clinic, and telling people what we could tell them about how to be prepared, how to think about their case, not in any way coaching them what to say, but to think about, these are the grounds on which you can get asylum. This is what they're going to be asking for. This is what you can expect. And at the beginning, I was saying, you using lawyerly words like you'll be detained and you'll have to pass a credible fear interview. And I realized, the looks on their faces, they weren't understanding. And then when I said, they're going to arrest you and treat you like criminals, which is basically what was happening, and that realization sunk in, and it was hard. And I think that, even today, when I talk to people, no matter what I say to them here in Mexico, in central Mexico, they don't hear it because, God will help us, there's just one man. If we can just tell our stories, they'll hear us and they'll let us in. They'll know how hard it is. They'll know what we've come through to get here. So they'll open the doors. And I'm sure Marichelle can collaborate that, that's not how it works. But people still have this magical thinking about it. And it's really hard. And, during the caravans, I was pretty set on advising them not to go to the US border. And that's not what they wanted to hear either, because just the fact that they had gotten where they are, that they had traveled so far and had made it, was just a testament to God being on their side, and this being, this was okay. This is the right thing. It was miraculous that they were there. And so the miracles would continue as they went farther north.
And when you say you
So-
set up a legal aid clinic, what you really mean is you parked your van in the middle of 5,000 people and put up a sign, right? And said, legal
And-
advice here.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess the good thing is I speak to law students now, and I talk about trauma-informed interviewing and having, things that you should provide to have the best type of a situation when you talk to people. And the best that I could provide there is we could close the curtains of the van, close the door, and have a quiet place, a private place. Because not surprisingly, shockingly, there were, so many people were literally fleeing for their lives. They would come to me and they look over their shoulder and they, tuck into the van, shut the door, made sure they wouldn't say anything until they felt comfortable that it was quiet and private, because the situations that they're fleeing are so dangerous and so precarious. It's
I
important.
can't even imagine, because I know from my own experience interviewing asylum seekers who've been through trauma that sometimes it takes several meetings before they're really comfortable enough to open up and tell you what the really most important thing is for their case. Which
Yeah.
of course they don't know, and you need to elicit it, and it takes a lot of time and trust building. And of course, in that kind of situation, you don't have time for that.
No, not at all. And it's practicing emergency legal aid. It's the
Yeah.
equivalent of triage in a war zone. That, we were focused on finding children. There was a lot of unaccompanied children, and finding them to make sure that they knew at the time, everything was going to hell and everybody's rights were being violated. But at the time, and still, children have special protections. And so we wanted to make sure that they knew to seek it out, and they knew what to say, to tell them they were afraid. You have to have these trigger words, tell the government, I'm afraid to return home. So telling them that and finding the children is what was our big focus then and still.
So Maricha, let me pull you into the conversation now. Can you give us a little summary of the kind of human rights work you do, migration, but also the other very interesting and compelling work you're involved in?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I'm very interested in helping Vicky to make this documentary, Las Abogadas, because I think it's important to make people know what are we confronting with these injustices, what are the forces we are against. I think that majorly are organized crime and governments that use people as like a bag of beans, or as objects. So I worked in human rights since I was 14 years old. I started a little protest here in the border of San Isidro in Tijuana against the 187th proposal. That the one that was getting the migrants to not have education or healthcare. So that's how I started. And then I figured out that if I studied criminal law, I could get involved and maybe help. But then I did my professional services at the DA's agency, where they got all the crimes there: sexual, homicide, car theft. Everything was in one agency. This was at the end of the 90s. So then I noticed that you need more people on the human rights side than on the criminal justice side. That's why I specialized in community organizing. I went to Oakland, California, with the Center of Third World Organizing, and they taught me how to door knock, how to even make, a big pancarta. How do you say, Rebecca? Like a big,
Like a sign? A
yes,
poster?
how to
Yeah.
write the signs, how to get accountability from the people in the government, how to get them in restaurants and make a noise about them being there. So these tragedies don't work in Mexico a lot because we don't have community organization here. most of the political parties are the ones that organize people in the barrios and in the ghettos. So what I do is I try to help on human rights issues, even taking them to the Supreme Court of Justice. We taken 2 cases, one of a girl that was sentenced to 23 years of prison for having a miscarriage, that it wasn't even provoked, even if it was, they shouldn't have done that. So that's one case that we took. Even we took it to the CEDAW, the convention, the Committee for Elimination of Violence Against Women in the UN. And then we specialized in how to give attention to migrant women that are victims of sex traffic and also that have been addicted to heroin or other drugs so they can keep sexual exploiting them. So these are the kind of vulnerable groups that we try to work with. One of my sisters is a psychiatrist, the other one is psychologist, the other one is specialized in nutrition and healthcare and has an organization that's called Refugee Health Alliance. So we have this family net. We also have people out of our family to help, but we have this family net to help in the ways we can, because I grew up with, my father was a psychiatrist here in Tijuana, and he put up the first methadone clinic in all Latin America. That's why I grew up with this, to understand this kind of population and try to understand. Sometimes there are things that are not in our culture or in our language, like the words that Rebecca said. You talk about with legal language and they don't understand with legal slang. So the thing we try to do is make human rights understandable for the people who really need it, and even working through art with this. So I think that's it.
Wow, that's a lot. It's kind of family business you're involved in there. Rebecca, when you went out to the caravan and you had 3 other volunteers with you, one of them was another attorney named Charlene De Cruz, who came down, I think thanks to Lawyers for Good Government. And she later started a project up at the border, Project Corazon, which I believe you went up and volunteered with her for a time in Matamoros. Can you tell us what your impression was there when you made it to the northern border?
Yeah, so I'm trying to process, so Karine, first of all, is an amazing superhero. I think that, working with all the women that I work with is super inspiring. And I think that's the message that I often share with people is looking at the helpers. When you feel so distraught about what's happening, looking to the people who are doing work is really, inspiring. Yeah, Charlene was one of actually a professional hero before I met her. She founded the, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on what she founded. It was in Arizona,
The Florence Project in Arizona.
The Florence Project back in the 80s, when Marilyn was talking about working with Central Americans back then. So the Florence Project, the first round of the US dehumanizing and causing millions, or causing the flight of migrants from Central America to the US, Charlene worked on and in Arizona. And then she started basically providing legal aid to the migrants stuck at the US, at the Mexico-US border, thanks to a program initiated by President Trump called the Migrant Protection Protocols. Immigration advocates will call it the Migrant Persecution Protocols. Basically what it is, it required asylum seekers to wait in Mexico while their immigration case made its way through the courts in the United States. I think at its height, 40,000, 50,000 people were covered by this. Do you know, Karine,
I think that's about right. And this is the program that you may have heard colloquially referred to as the Remain in Mexico program. So
Right.
like I said, the people had to stay on the Mexican side of the border and wait for their appointments, quote unquote, to appear in
Right.
immigration court.
And to be clear, it's completely illegal because the U.S. is a signatory to multiple international treaties, as well as in our own domestic immigration laws, requires people fleeing harm to be offered protection. The US is obligated to let these people in and to determine whether they have an asylum case for which the US would provide protection. So by keeping them in Mexico violates all sorts of human rights laws and obligations and protocols. But nonetheless, the US has been doing that for 3 years. Under President Biden, I mean, it just got expanded more and more under Trump, and Biden came in saying that he was going to get rid of it. And in fact, he tried to, but the US Supreme Court, in this wacky twist, is requiring the current administration, even though it doesn't want to enforce it, is requiring them to continue with the program. So in Matamoros, it sprang up as a tent city on the Central Plaza, literally right when you cross the border, when the cars come across, and there's a plaza right there. And because Matamoros and most of these border towns are so dangerous, people huddle as close as they can to the border crossings for safety, and people were living in tents there. And Charlene set up an immigration clinic to help people navigate, what was to come. And there was these tent courts that eventually got built. And the whole thing has been very much against normal legal precedents and policies, and just, it's so wrong, is the gist of it. And
So we
Charlene
essentially had these informal refugee camps spring up on the Mexican side of the border with no services that you would normally have when there's a refugee camp somewhere.
Exactly. And Mary Chell could talk about it more, but I saw no international presence. I saw, the UNHCR, United Nations High Commission for Refugees. When you think of refugee camps, you think of, in Africa, and there's these big tents and their services. And that wasn't the case in Matamoros, for sure. There were small nonprofits, grassroots organizations. A group of teachers started coming across and bringing food to people, and that grew bigger. And there was the global response management is a group of medical providers who started medical clinics, and they did some infrastructure. They installed porta potties and showers, warm showers, and hand washing stations. And I think a testament to the efforts was that in the time that the camp in Matamoros existed, there was not a single case of COVID breaking out in the tent camps, despite not having, neither social distancing or any sort of, real hygiene resources. But when Biden declared MPP done, that camp got disassembled. The people were not, some of those people were allowed into the United States, but people continued to come. So there's now a refugee camp in Reynosa, exactly the same thing. There's 3,000 people there, and I'm told that there's 25 porta potties.
Oh boy, so to the extent that there were nonprofits that came in and started to create some kind of infrastructure, that was dismantled when Biden announced he was dismantling MPP.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
it sounds like in some ways things were worse for the people that were still stuck there trying to get in.
Yeah, absolutely. For new arrivals, because those people who were in the tents, they disbanded that camp because they were all in MPP. Those people were allowed to come in. But, every day, hundreds of people are arriving. And so the organizations that were working in Matamoros have shifted over to Reynosa. And I don't know, Mary Chell, you can speak better about what's happening in Tijuana, what kind of services people have there. I'm curious.
Yeah, go ahead, Marichel. What is it like, and what has it been like in Tijuana? Are there people sleeping on the streets there trying to get into the US as well?
Yes, there's a bridge named El Chaparral. So the refugee camp here in Tijuana is called El Chaparral because they live down a bridge where cars pass all day, all night, and make this amazing noise that's driving people crazy. And not just the noise, they live close to a border. They live close to a border where the river and the sewage goes through. It's not even, water that they can use. It's just sewage and that's not consumable. So they live there. They used to have a couple of porta potties for 500 people, but the government took it because the enterprise that provided the service said they gave them back all like very in poor conditions. So they don't have the, you know, the basic services, water. Some organizations, most of them are religious organizations that also I want to be very clear on this, not because they are religious, they are good, because some of these organizations link the people, the migrant people to the tratantes, to the traffickers. Some of these people have like rehabilitation centers for drugs, but they use the people, the youngsters, young men to fill the big trucks of drugs. You know, they take them out of the rehab center and take them to use them, you know, to these trucks, and they cross. Sometimes they obligate them to cross to use their bodies to cross drugs to United States, you know, all that kind of things that you can imagine like in a police novel or something like that. That's really
Let me
happening
just interrupt
here.
you for a minute. Are you saying some people in the guise of being religious representatives or parts of religious organizations are actually drug traffickers?
Drug and people traffickers for
traffickers.
sex trafficking.
Yeah.
Also, they are the main involved, the main organizations involved in child pornography. You know, they are linked with this church like Nexium and all this kind of, you know, creepy organizations in the world. But the Tijuana and Puerto Vallarta are the principal child pornography places because of what's happening with the migrants, with the little children of the migrants. And also some lawyers from the United States tell them that if they're pregnant, they will go to they can cross to United States easier. So they are getting pregnant like if it was like for Christmas, you know, just like whatever. So most women and their infertile age, they come here to Tijuana, to the border, and most of them are pregnant. You know, even teenagers. Teenagers, most of them are pregnant because they get raped. We know that people that come from Colombia, from Chile, that they were there in the like in a refugee state. They take this contraceptive pills that last 3 months because they know that they will for sure get raped. You know, and that we have documented cases of women that were raped for, like 7 or more times through their journey. So I think that it's not just the organized crime, it's also all the institutions that are permitting this. We have concentration camps in our borders. I live like 20 minutes from El Chaparral. And what I can do as a lawyer is only go and get my job and like a goodwill, but we don't have like these big organizations like in Centro Mexico, you know, in Mexico City, where they have all the resources. When, you know, the UN or international organizations give money to Mexican organizations, the most of the money goes where the government says it should go. Most of the human rights protection go where the federal government is, with the local people, buying your stuff in the local areas. So it helped the local development. If not, we're just like putting on, how do you say, a curita, you know, like a Band-Aid in cancer, you know? And the corruption here even goes to a place where when we go to denounce the sex trafficking, the raping of the woman, I got a few years ago, I got a how do you say, not a gallina, not a chicken, the other one,
The rooster.
a rooster. I got they without a head, they left a rooster in the front of my house, you know, and that's the kind of signs they give us. So that's it for me.
Wow, that's a lot. You're really in the thick of things for sure. I can confirm, having worked with a lot of young people who have made their way to New York, that almost all the girls are on birth control because they knew in advance they had to, unfortunately, prepare for the possibility that they would be raped on the way, and many of them were. Just awful stuff. Rebecca, you're on mute. I think you're trying to say something.
Actually, I was just gonna say that when at the migrant shelter here at the Albergue Aba in Celaya, I learned that they call them anti-Mexicos. They call the contraceptives in anticipation of either being raped or selling their bodies.
Wow.
So,
So Rebecca, when you were at the northern border, can you talk a little bit about what they were calling metering, the process that they used informally and formally to kind of regulate the flow of migrants that the US was allowing to come across the border?
Sure, that was actually the first of my first experience with chipping away at long established norms and rights of how asylum seekers are processed into the United States. And Charlene told me about it. She goes, they have a list that, you know, they're actually the metering first started under Obama. With the which group of migrants was he metering? Was it Haitians then?
Yeah, it may have been.
Yeah, I think under Obama when there was Black migrants and I think they were Haitians coming across, and he said, you know, look, we can't process all the people. We're going to give you a number. Take your number, and we can only process 10 a day, for example. So my first visit to the northern border was witnessing this, and it was shocking to me because it was actually the Mexican immigration officials who seemed to be in charge of this. There was a table set up in Chaparral before it became the refugee camp, and people would show up every day to get their number. And there was this big book that the migrants themselves were in charge of, and they hand wrote your name in there, and they gave you just, you know, a little slip of paper that had a number on it. Nothing official at all. And it was mind blowing to me that this is how people were getting allowed to present themselves to the US officials. And it was such an unofficial, everything about it was unofficial, and it was being handled sort of by by Grupo Beta, which is a group of Mexican, part of the Mexican Immigration Service. And at the time, the last time I was up in Tijuana, when they were still doing the metering thing, the wait was months long. And that was before the Remain in Mexico policy, before the MPP program. So it was just, it's small things, you know, they first start with this, they give everybody a number to limit how many people can apply. And then they say, well, it doesn't matter what number you have, you're gonna have to wait in Mexico anyway. So that was the first step, and it was started under Obama, and Trump just picked it up and ran with it.
And Marichal, I understand in Tijuana, we know an attorney, Mulu, an Ethiopian American attorney who is also featured in the documentary, mentioned that Black migrants and African migrants in particular in Tijuana weren't even on the list that these people were informally keeping, especially if you don't speak either English or Spanish. It's difficult to figure out what's going on and how can you kind of even get in the queue to get across the border, get an interview or talk to an officer. What have you seen there for Black and African migrants in particular?
This horrible thing happened when Vicky came to follow Mulu, the lawyer, and we were with them trying to, you know, make like a security community there, because they could rob Vicky's camera, because things are really difficult there. You know, you have to understand that it's not like, oh, they will rob you because they're immigrants. No, they have hunger. If you go there with a big $40,000 camera, they will take it. So we went there, we talked to the people in the media, and they sent some drones in that day. So we were between the tents trying to give legal orientation to the Black, African, and Haitian people that are there. And that was a Saturday. And on the Sunday morning, they came, all other migrants, Mexican and from Central America, attacked the Black refugee space. They burned the tents. They went with machetes. They went with guns, with sticks, and they even hit pregnant women there sleeping in the tents. A pregnant woman from Haiti got hit in the head with a machete, And what we could do is say, we got to her, were the last people that we got to her them to cross to United States, because we proved that they were racially like endangered, you know, here in Tijuana, because the people from Honduras and Central America thought that we were only helping the Black people because they were Black. Yes, we were helping them because they were Black, because they don't get enough food, they don't get enough water, because the people that work the kitchens are from Central America and are discriminating people of color, well, darker colors, you know, because there are people from Central America that are Blacks, but they join with the Central America. It's not even a clear race thing. I think it's more xenophobic, because they are not from the Americas, you know, the African people. So I helped Mulu make a denounce of a rape that a girl from Africa suffered, and we went to the DA's office. And what happened is that they set a date from November, and I say, could you have a protection order? The guy that raped her in her house said he was an activist, showed her pictures of him helping other Africans, and went into her house and raped her. So she is in danger. And they said, oh, well, in November we can hear about that. That's how justice is working. I tried to explain to this girl that we're not really looking for justice, because not even Mexican women don't get justice here. We are just trying to document it so it would maybe serve her for the migration process. I know people have certain numbers, but there are also sexual and work traffickers that go for the lists, and they give you, if you have a list, $100 per name and phone, because they will take them and they will kidnap them and make them work in farms. So I think that this is the only thing we can help. It's helping the communities organize. That's what we've been doing, give them information, because also I know about that Mexican lawyers are going to the camps and asking them for $3,000 and promise them to cross them to the United States. And I'm investigating who these lawyers are. I'm gonna burn their asses, I promise. And that's it.
All right. Yeah, it drives me just to distraction when I hear about attorneys, US or Mexican or whatever, who take advantage of vulnerable people like this. Rebecca, I know that you also went with Vicky, the director of the film, to the southern border of Mexico, to Tapachula in Oaxaca, which is a crossing point for migrants from Guatemala, coming through Guatemala, whether from there or elsewhere. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like, and the extent to which it shows the way Mexico is enforcing US immigration policy?
Right. So in May, I went down with Charlene de Cruz, and that's actually where I met Marichel, in Tapachula, which I learned they call it Atrapachula. In English, that would be Trapachula, because in the state of Chiapas, where Tapachula is, has its own rules. They're doing their own border enforcement, so that people who are able to cross the border, and actually it's not hard at all to cross the border. We spent a day on the river, and there's lots of informal trade. They're transporting goods across the river on these flat rafts, just crossing the river, and so they're not going through any any sort of customs or anything like that. And I imagine that's how people cross, but they're the Mexican government is very attuned to stopping any people from coming across. A lot of people are arrested immediately. While I was there, we spent maybe 10 minutes outside of what's the largest detention center in Mexico, by far the largest detention in Mexico, and I believe it's the largest in Central America as well. Thousands and thousands of migrants are being detained there, waiting for deportation. And I stood outside that building for about 10 minutes and witnessed I think it was at least 3 full buses of migrants being deported, and you could see them, through the window, and they were mostly young men, being, sent back to Central America, sent back to Guatemala. I don't know how far they would transport the people, but they call it a Trapachula. People basically cannot get out of there. So even if they have, there's a process in Mexico to seek protection from the government, and they get often a humanitarian visa, or they get, documents that allow them to stay and live in Mexico and move freely throughout Mexico. But Chiapas state doesn't recognize that. They don't let them move beyond the borders of the state. And I think my observation is that this is funded by the US government to basically outsource border enforcement from, we used to, protect our northern border, the northern Mexico border, but they've outsourced it going down. And I've witnessed it in central Mexico here in different ways. I've seen that the trains, central Mexico, a lot of people ride on La Bestia, and the speed of the trains has been increased. The government has installed physical barriers for people to get onto the trains or to knock people off of the trains as they're riding on the side of it. These big concrete ballards right alongside the train tracks. So if you happen to be hanging off of it and you get knocked over, and these are things that were implemented under the Trump administration to improve U.S. border security. And definitely it's what I've observed down in Chiapas, that the money that I don't know for certain, but I can speculate that the money for this militarization, this border enforcement, is coming from the U.S. And I believe it's also going farther south. There's a lot of pressure being put on the Mexican government to make sure that migrants don't make it to the northern border with the U.S. And so it's on Mexico to make sure that they don't come in through the southern border.
Yeah, I mean, during the Trump administration, the US government had actually negotiated what they call these safe third country agreements with Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador, which means basically anybody that comes through those countries, you can say, well, you could have stopped there and asked for asylum. So we're not going to recognize any claims you make if you go farther on to another country. Of course, it's ridiculous because these are the countries that people are fleeing from, seeking
Right.
asylum elsewhere.
And prior to those agreements, the U.S. had a safe third country agreement with one country in the whole world, which was Canada,
Right.
because our legal systems and the level of protection that we can offer are basically equivalent. And it's laughable. I mean, it's not even laughable. It's just ridiculous to even think that Guatemala, El Salvador, or Honduras could provide protection, because those are the countries that people are fleeing.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's
And
bending
even
over
Canada at
backwards.
some point was suggesting that the US was no longer a safe country and that they weren't going to abide by the
Indeed.
safe third country agreement with the US because people were not safe here. In fact, there was a time when a lot of migrants who had made their way from Latin America through the United States went up to the northern border of Canada and tried to seek asylum in Canada. And that's where we are now.
Mhm.
So what were you doing down in Tapachula, Marichel, when Rebecca was lucky enough to meet you there?
I was trying to help this organization to put the clinic and, work with the local government in some ways, because most of the time, local governments are most easy to deal with, because they maybe don't know the federal regulations because they're ignorant, because they are, and also because corruption is a thing. So they asked the organization I worked with for the names. Hi, this is my doggy. For the names of the migrants, and they give them the names. With the names, they can go to organized crime, because the government and organized crime are the same thing here in Mexico, and they get the people they are following. Even people that were in the camp in Matamoros that used to be in Tapachula are being threatened here in Tijuana from organized crime from Tapachula. So not even from their countries, so there are 2 or 3 organized crime bands against one family, or against one group of people, or against people from pueblo, no, because of one little county. So in Tapachula, I think things are harder because of the geographic and the issues and also the poverty they have there. In Tijuana, we have a lot of drugs. It's what we have. So when people come here and didn't use drugs, they use them because you can get for like $2.50 a little like crystal meth balloon, and you can smoke all day and don't need to eat. So, or you think you don't need to eat, but that's what people tend to do here. Even fentanyl or those hard drugs that mess you up in short time. Also, I worked with people that are deported from California, and people in California consume a lot of opium, tramadol, even heroin, through needles. So when they deport Mexican or even people that were born in the United States, they deport them to Tijuana because they look Mexican. Like the movie from Teach Marine from the 90s, Born in East LA. If you haven't seen it, please look at it. It's super cool. It describes what happens. Also, I can recommend another documentary called Bajo el Tacaná, Under the Tacaná. This volcano in Tapachula, and it tells you how the women, mostly women, are thrown from La Bestia, from the train, the big train, and they get their arms and legs cut off because of the train. And also a documentary called Migranta, con M de Migranta. Migranta, it's also how they document how Central American and Mexican people go to Canada to work in the fields, and they are exploited. Obviously not like here in San Quintin or the fields here, but there's a kind of explosion, separations of family, so even Canada that we thought, they're not all that bad, well, they are.
Oh, yeah. You alluded to this phenomenon of people who are actually US citizens who are essentially being deported from the United States to Mexico. And the opposite happens, not the opposite, but there's a situation in the southern border with indigenous Mexicans. I think you mentioned to me the other day, Marichel, that indigenous Mexicans were being deported from Mexico. How is it that happens?
Yeah, actually, a lot of indigenous people are deported from Mexico to Guatemala because they only speak Mayan or Maya, because they only speak their local language. So when they ask them, are you from Mexico? They said, well, yeah, but they don't have an ID because probably they weren't even registered, because of where they live. People are getting registered in time, but the government hasn't been doing this in the indigenous places. So they can sell their children without any trouble. You know what I mean? I know it sounds horrible, but it has something to do with that, because they exchange some children or the girls for, bottles of Coca-Cola, things like that. So yes, people are deported. They ask them to sing the Mexican anthem. Most people in Mexico don't even know it. So yeah, that's the situation. And not only they deport indigenous people, but poor people and people with with deteriorated mental health. And also that they do that in the United States. When people, just lose their minds, we have here in Tijuana veterans that have been deported. We have people that have been in jail for years, and then they just deport them, if not try to reintegrate them into society. And they were born in the United States, but they're here in Tijuana. So I thought that maybe all how you call it, the gray tsunami, all the people from the United States that live in Rosarito, Ensenada, on the coast, I thought that maybe going to them would help. And I reached to some American associations here in the border, in Tijuana and Rosarito, but they are more interested in art, and things that make you feel pretty, like, so I still haven't find this tragedy, but I think I will find it someday. And if you can help me, that would be so
If
cool.
anybody can find a strategy, you can, I'm sure. I just wanted to acknowledge a comment we got in the chat from Maricela Daniel. Hi, Maricela, glad you could join us. That a lot of people representing themselves as lawyers may not be lawyers. I have to say, though, also in the United States, we have this phenomenon where lawyers in Latino communities say that they're notarios, which in the United States, to be a notary is nothing. Anybody can become a notary, and all you do is compare signatures on documents and say that a document is, what it purports to be. It's not like being a notario in Mexico or other Latin American countries, but they put a notario sign in their window and they take a lot of money from people, sometimes filing fake asylum applications, which can help somebody get an official work permit. So it looks like, wow, I've gotten something. I must be in the line for asylum in the future, when in fact they have no claim to asylum, and some fake lawyer or notario has charged them thousands of dollars to get them this work permit that will expire in a year anyway. So there's that too. As if it's not enough to deal with the laws that are being broken by our governments, we also have people pretending to be lawyers and notarios preying on people, often in their own communities, which makes it worse, because then you have people saying, well, my best friend's cousin is this person and they got their green card through this notario down the block, so of course they should be able to help me. Anyway, I digress. It's a pet peeve of mine. Rebecca, I wanted to go back to you and ask you, how did you get into immigration law in the first place? What made you decide that this is how you wanted to spend your career?
Both of my parents, I'm a first generation American. My dad was born in a refugee camp in post-World War II Germany and immigrated to the United States when he was 9. And my grandmother actually wrote a short autobiography about her experience fleeing the Russians, when they came to her town, and having to ride on a train with my uncle and keep him awake so he wouldn't fall off the train. And that wasn't, in my mind at the time when I went in, but I see the absolute parallels to what's happening today. My mom immigrated to the United States when she was in her early 20s to marry my dad. So the idea of migration is very personal to me, and refugee issues are very, very personal to me. And I always knew I wanted to save the world somehow. And I figured if I got to work with immigrants, I could do something and kind of travel vicariously through them. So that's how I got started.
And Marichelle, we already heard a little bit about how this is the family business in one way or another for you. But you're both such warriors, and the work you do is so important. How do you get other lawyers and other professionals, people with education and means and the time and the ability to learn about these kinds of issues and focus on them and use their own skills to help?
Was that a question for me or for Marichelle?
For either one of you. Marichelle, we can start with you.
Thanks. Well, I'm part of this organization, international organization named IFU, International Federation of Women in Universities. So I represent in Baja California the Mexican Federation of Women in Universities. And what we are doing is in a group named CAMEUS, Canada, Mexico, United States. We get together and we take some of the documented cases I have to the United Nations, make them have international impact so they can maybe do something locally. That's like a peer pressure from international organizations. And then how do we get them interested? Well, I participate in the meetings. Most of them are like academics. They are with like big names. They have their names already in Mexican history. Like this, I'm like the token there. I know it's kind of weird, but yes, I'm the token there. and I try to get close to the people that are writing the history, so the history of the vulnerable people gets in. So that's part of my plan. Also, we work with artists, also women in arts. We take the cases, the Human Rights Convention, talk to them about them. How are the human rights working in your life, you know, identify how your body reflects the human rights you need. You know, where do you live? Do you take a taxi or not? Do you have to walk to your work? Do you work in a, you know, all that things. I try to make people recognize how we all need human rights, and we need to fight together for them, because what happened in Texas, the one thing about they are giving numbers to people and then from Haiti and then deporting them. And what also happening with women rights in Texas, you know, so we need to make a comparative analysis of what happens in Mexico and the United States on human rights issues, because when we see some human rights of certain people violated in the news for in the United States, we will for sure see them here like 7 times more, you know, so we can like have a measure. Also talking about feminicides, homicides of LGBT people, migrant people, you know, most of the people that work in sex work in San Diego and all this like nice places, most of them lived here in Tijuana and got across the United States maybe in the 90s or something, you know, and we have like local communities of people not even organizers but just culturally united. So maybe like they do in Barcelona or in Canada with the migration, people live together in certain areas and share their culture. Maybe getting to know something of the culture of other people will make us see them as human beings, because we are not doing that. We are definitely not doing that. And I want to remember what the UN Secretariat said, that the world hasn't been worse in uh, all the time of the world being, you know, so because of the refugee crisis. So what we can do is talk to our peers, talk to our people, our colleagues about it, because this will not be on the news.
Yeah, you're right. This is certainly a time in history that we're living through that we never could have expected in our lifetimes. This combination of, you know, the refugee crisis, climate change, global epidemics, and they're all connected, right? Climate change is driving migration. Epidemics are driven by the way that we are not taking care of the earth and the people around us. It's all connected. Rebecca, I know one of the things that you spend your time doing is working, volunteering at the Abba House shelter and working with Pastor Ignacio. I think a lot of people on the line here probably know about Abba House. Do you want to talk about that a little? And I think you have a clip you could show as well.
Sure, yeah. So the Latin American Relief Fund supports Albergue Abba over in Celaya. And we were very successful during the pandemic to we had a capital fundraising campaign and were able to raise enough money to buy the building that houses Abba. And of course, those of you who met Pastor Ignacio know that he is an incredibly tireless warrior for migrants' rights, and he has bigger plans, you know, to expand. And so we are always trying to support him in whatever ways we can. Abba is unique. Well, actually, I can just show the clip. We have a brand new fundraising video, and I'll share that with you now. This might be one of the global premiere of the Abba fundraising clip. So here it is. Let's see.
Unfortunately, I'm not hearing any sound.
Sound? No sound? I see.
Well, even without sound, at least there were subtitles, so you could get the general idea.
I'm sorry you didn't hear the sound. Now I don't know how to stop sharing.
There should be
Uh,
a stop sharing button on your
I
screen.
would think that there should be a stop sharing button. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about the sound. So yes, at least there were subtitles. So yeah, so Albergue ABA is an amazingly dynamic place, and we're lucky that Pastor Ignacio is there, and people who want to do something about all this depressing news that we've presented. ABA is always looking for donations, mainly of money because it's not really set up to have people come in, to donate their time necessarily. But we're always on the lookout for ways that we can improve that as well. So thank you for letting me share that clip with everybody.
Yeah, to quote Judith Gill, Pastor Ignacio is probably the closest to Gandhi that I will ever meet in my lifetime. He's just such a compassionate, amazing human being, and devotes his life to helping make the lives of migrants better. And
Sure.
for those that don't know, his shelter, I think, is the only one in Mexico that is certified to take in people who need amputations because or need surgery because they've lost limbs when they've fallen from La Bestia. And many of the migrants don't just stay the normal 2 or 3 days in his shelter, but they stay for weeks or months at a time while they're getting medical care and while they're recuperating. Just extraordinary things that he does. I do want to open up the floor to questions to anybody in the audience that wants to jump into the conversation. You can write in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and we can see your pretty face on the screen. That would be great too. Meritxell, while we're waiting, do you want to talk a little bit about any of the other? You can also send an email if you're watching us on YouTube to the email address that's there on the screen. Your work goes beyond migration. I know we're focusing in today's discussion about what's happening at the northern and the southern borders, but what are some of the other topics that you've taken on, and especially things that, for example, you've taken to the United Nations?
What we took recently with a university women, we made a parallel event in the United Nations talking about migration, and there were women from specialized in economics in Latin America in the United States. And she said something really interesting, that what is happening in Latin America with the refugee crisis, it's majorly because the United States misbehaved in Latin America. I call it misbehaved because there are a lot of documentaries and a lot of proof of what happened. How what they did in El Salvador, what they are doing in Mexico with all the guns they are bringing down here, and I think we could find like what we are doing is trying to analyze the Human Rights Convention that protect women in vulnerable situations with how are the policies on certain countries like Canada, like the United States, like Sweden, like something we should do, and also Mexico and Birmania, because they're one of the most corrupt governments in the world. So we are now in the International Foundation Against Corruption, give some data about how Mexico is the 4th country of sex and work trafficking. So one of the things I try to focus is giving attention to sexual traffic victims, giving them some tools for them to try to not fall into what the authorities say they will help, like being a protected witness and all that. It doesn't really work. And I have a question here. You want to read it so I can maybe take it?
Yeah, so Mexico under AMLO has humanitarian policies, decriminalization, no family separation, etc. but they don't seem to be put into practice. Corruption at all levels is an issue, especially locally, as you mentioned. What else is going on? What should the federal government be doing?
Okay, there's something very interesting that happened last week. The international relations minister, Marcelo Ebrard, said that the U.S. government was fooling the Haitians, the Texas government. No, so they usually don't do that. They usually say like everything's okay, we love each other and everything, and now they are giving this certain like kind of maybe they will do something about it. I don't think that they will do things in the north border. Maybe in Tapachula they will take more action, because since AMLO was running for president, he told that all the progress has to be in the south border. And they talked about a big railroad, a train, a Maya train, that will go through indigenous and sacred communities. So they are opposing it. Not most of the people are happy with AMLO. He is like, we hope that because he was a lefty, we would have more human rights and stuff, but it's not true. It's not really true. The corruption it's been reduced. Yes, because there are less people robbing all the money, it's been reduced just like that. And what we say here, what should the federal government be doing? I think we should be, the local responses are important, but we think we could make like a big meeting, through the government, not only the Mexican government or the United States, but even like this, they have in Mexico, all the governors come together. They have the groups that try security and economy in the UN. Why don't we try to push a meeting, international meeting, to talk about migration and the local policies, have a comparative analysis of what are the migration procedures, what are the refugee procedures in each country, and then try to make something that it's homologar, harmonize them based on the Vienna Convention. I know it's super old, the Vienna Convention, but as we see it right now, as an international lawyer, I think it's a better response, because, okay, it doesn't have a gender perspective or anything, but it has a human perspective. That is what we need right now.
Yeah, Marisela makes a point in the chat that regarding Central America, it's very much true that the United States bears responsibility. But what's interesting is that currently the largest flow of migrants are from Venezuela and many from Cuba and Haiti as well. I've noticed also here in the US, where I run a pro bono program for my law firm, that attention has been shifted to Afghanistan, for lots of understandable reasons. And we have Afghani refugees that deserve assistance because the US government got them into the situation in the first place where they're now having to seek refuge. But I personally worry that it's taking attention away from what's happening at the border and what's happening with the Central American and the Haitian and the other migrants that are making their way up to the Mexican-US border. Rebecca, do you want to weigh in on the extent to which the reason you have to do the work you do is because your own government of the United States got us into this situation in the first place?
Right. I mean, that's, I assume, and I don't know, this is such a, big stretch, but the audience here knows that, what was involved for decades and the US geopolitical involvement that created the circumstances from which people are fleeing. I think one thing that's really interesting is the intersection between racism and migration. US immigration policy has been racist since its inception with the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was the very first immigration law that they wanted to exclude the Chinese from coming into the US because they were bringing all sorts of horrible things. And it's always been it was founded in racism, and it continues to be perpetuated in racism. If we look at the people whose countries we're destroying, it's always the brown people. Afghanistan, Central America, Vietnam, every last, the last wars that we've fought since World War II has been against people of color. So yeah, the US's involvement, the problems in Central America can be directly attributed to the US involvement in Central America. I think the bigger point that I want to make is, for the last 4 years, Trump has been our boogeyman, and he's been who we've blamed everything on and all the horrible things. But I want to point out that under Biden, Trump destroyed something new every day. And under Biden, we're not getting new destruction every day, but he's allowing the same things to continue. For example, under Trump, he pulled out this very obscure public health law called Title 42. And I want to make the point, we talked about making this point, that closed the border, basically has effectively closed the border to any asylum seekers based on using the pandemic as an excuse. It's a very narrowly drawn law that says people who might be at risk of being in a group setting, we don't want them in. And so it was constructed really narrowly to basically include any asylum seekers. So asylum seekers are not allowed to come to the US and not allowed to have their claims heard. And again, that is completely illegal. You can't shut that down based on international treaties that we've been signatory to. And asylum is completely legal. Showing up at a country's border, whether you have a visa or not, and asking for protection is 100% legal, is the way to do it. So, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but if you need the words to use, this is what you say. It is legal to show up and ask for protection, and they're doing it the right way. So it angers me when I hear people saying, people, including my own family members who fled from harm, saying, well, we did it the right way. And people coming to the border are doing it the right way. And Biden, not as bad as Trump, but not any better. So those are the 2 points that I wanted to make.
I'm glad you made that point. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that drives me the craziest when people say, oh, they should just get in line. Well, for most immigrants, most prospective immigrants, there is no line. But one line is you go to the border and you say, I fear going home to my country. I would like to seek asylum. That's the way you do it. And that's all that people are trying to do. And by continuing Title 42, Biden is continuing essentially to keep the border shut to asylum seekers and others.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to try to show another clip, and I think I know how to get the sound going. So let's see. There should be a share sound. There we go. Let me see. You hear the sound?
When Trump was elected, we all knew it was going to be bad, but we had no idea how bad it would get, and we had no idea how quickly it would get so bad.
We don't know if they're murderers, if they're killers, if they're MS-13. We're throwing them out by the hundreds.
Trump was describing them as invaders, and he was sending the National Guard to the border.
I have ordered another 3,750 troops.
I think the first group of caravan people, there was like 5,000 migrants in the first caravan, and there was 4 of us lawyers. And we were telling them what we could. You can't be surrounded by all that misery and pain.
When the Trump administration announced its policy of zero tolerance,
The United States will not be a migrant camp.
and that week, family separation had exploded. The trauma that went through those kids and those parents is something that'll never be erased.
People that I wanted to reach out the most and be able to assist were African migrants or Black migrants coming into Mexico and not being able to have any type of assistance. All they wanted was safety and security and refuge, and they believed that the United States was a country that would provide them that.
Okay, all right. Okay, let's go. So we got called back. So la otra abogada me dijo para traerla.
Señora, su aplicación es negativa.
We were denied again, which is just ridiculous. It just doesn't make any sense. They have a blind person who's in the system and they don't feel like they have to follow the law, their own law.
President Biden on defense this morning with the migrant surge growing at the southern border.
They don't know what's happening down here. A lot of women told us that in the night, the guys try to open the tents to rape them. I'm afraid that nobody's really giving legal advice to them. They just know they're waiting, but they don't know what they're waiting for.
Year-old girl whose mom was in the northern part of Mexico, and the girl came to find the mom to reunite with the mom, and she suffered an accident falling off the train.
Migration shouldn't end. Why should it? Human beings have migrated since the dawn of humanity. This is our basic human right.
So there we have it. There was a trailer, an early trailer from Las Abogadas, the film in which Rebecca and Meritxell and a number of other fierce, intrepid women attorneys are featured about the work that they do at the border and in central Mexico with migrants who are doing nothing but trying to seek safety for themselves and their family. So we hope that when the movie comes out, you'll all watch it and you'll be hearing more about it over the months to come. I see we have another comment in the chat. Oh, thank you, Rebecca. She put in the URL for lasabogadosfilm.com if you'd like to learn more about the film and our featured subjects and anything else about what we're doing. Do we have any other questions? Maybe from the YouTube audience? Cliff, did you get any questions? I guess not. So Rebecca and Meritxell, I will give you a chance to say some last words. And I'm also going to share my screen one more time to show the names of some organizations that people are looking for ways that they can help. There are, of course, lots of organizations that need our money and need our support, but that's certainly one way. Anybody with, if you have a lot of money or a little money, every little bit helps. But Rebecca, why don't I hand it over to you to talk about ways people can help? You're on mute.
Thank you, Corinne. I used to say that the way to help is, by voting. We needed to get Trump out. We did that. And I think now is to stay involved, is to stay aware. It's hard because it's not on the front of the newspapers anymore. It's not the front page of any of the news about what's happening, but know that migrants are still coming and your help is still needed. And these are organizations that the Latin American Relief Fund I work with. The Sidewalk School started in Matamoros by a teacher who saw that they needed help and was bringing food in. And then she started bringing in teachers using certified teachers who were also asylum seekers themselves to provide education for kids. And when we talk about these migrant camps, they've been living, prior to the disbanding of the camp in Matamoros, people were living there for almost 2 years. Kids were not going to school. And so the Sidewalk School started a program of school for them, and they provide education for the residents of ABBA shelter here. They've built a building in Reynosa, and they're the ones funding some of those porta potties, some of those very, very rare porta potties at the Reynosa encampment. Lawyers for Good Government is a fantastic organization that actually employs our friend Charlene and provides the legal aid clinic in Matamoros. Project Corazon helps provide lawyers to migrants when, who need it. And I'll let Marichel talk about Refugee Health Alliance.
Hi, thank you. Well, Refugee Health Alliance is a binational organization that medical professionals from San Diego and from Tijuana came together and started illegally crossing medicine, and I helped them to Tijuana because we didn't get the permits. So we started doing this like on small proportions, attending a little group of migrants, but now they have a big clinic. Everything is totally legal. Everything is, online, and also there are the fewest medical organizations that don't discriminate people, because we have attended migrant women that are in the doors of a public hospital and they chain the doors so they cannot get in and give birth there. So yeah, Refugee Health Alliance is the organization I recommend to donate. And also, if you need more information, it's in Spanish, but you can reach Red Iberoamericana Pro Derechos Humanos, which is the organization I lead since 2007. And I will gladly, if you contact me, give you more information or interviews or whatever you need. And also you can donate to the Las Abogadas documentary.
Yes, I didn't put
That's a
that
good
link here, but go to lasabogadosfilm.com. You'll see the trailer, you'll see bios of all of our featured attorneys, and you'll see a link where you could donate. And we could definitely use your help because we want to finish this film and get it out and use it as an educational tool so that people understand what's going on. I mean, that's the point of it. It's a nonprofit venture with an educational purpose to make sure people understand the migration crisis more than they do now. Last chance for any questions, anybody?
And also beware of the spring breaker organizations.
Well, thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you to the Center for Global Justice for inviting us here today. It was a pleasure speaking with all of you.
Thank
And
you.
I want to thank all of you, Corinne, Rebecca, Maricel, and congratulate you on the tremendous work that you have been doing. It's really heart-wrenching to see and to learn, as we did today, what it is that migrants and refugee seekers have to go through. And that's even before they reach the border. And then what more they have to go through then. It takes great resilience to do that. And really have to respect those who have struggled to try to find a better life for themselves and for their family, and have the courage to flee an intolerable situation at home. It's a great human tragedy that we see unfolding before our eyes. And I really have to take my hat off to those of you as lawyers, as well as others who are assisting people in their odyssey. Now, thank you for sharing that experience with us today. Today's webinar, as well as our past programs, are available on YouTube and accessible from our website, globaljusticecenter.org. I hope that next week you will join us for what is a very special program on the occasion of what used to be called Columbus Day, but is now called Indigenous Peoples Day or First Nations Day. And we will be honored to have as our speaker Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who has written really the definitive history, the indigenous people's history of the United States, and has now just come out with a new book, Not a Nation of Immigrants. So she'll be talking about that book next Monday, 1 o'clock Central Time. Hope you will join us for that. And finally, let me close with thanks to our webinar team, Roberto Robles, Liz Mestris, Gregory Diamond, Olivia Canales, and myself. And now, this is Cliff Durand signing off till next Monday.